Welcome back to the full view now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has congratulated Keir Starmer on his appointment to the position of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Starmer assumed a position following the landslide victory after the general elections that took place on Thursday. And President Ramaphosa says he looks forward to working with Prime Minister Starmer to enhance the strong historical relations between South Africa and the United Kingdom. South Africa and the UK are strategic partners with a broad as well as vibrant relationship led by a commitment to liberal values, democracy and the rule of law. Well, the biggest development in international news this week had to be the resignation of the now former UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who was under fire after the results showed early on that his Conservative Party was indeed on course for the worst result in its history, making way for the new regime of Sir Keir Starmer. For this discussion, we have roped in Professor Stephen Chan from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the Faculty of Law and Social Studies at London University. Prof, great having you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. So was this move by Sunak an obvious and expected one during these historic elections in the UK? And what do you then make of his apology in his resignation speech?
Well, he tried to make a gracious apology and a gracious, as it were, concession. Everyone tries their best to be gracious, but it's very, very clear he accepts responsibility for leading the Conservative Party to a terrible defeat, although it must be said it wasn't entirely his fault. His predecessors as Conservative prime ministers did not help at all. And in fact, the damage was probably begun with the Boris Johnson prime ministership and certainly continued with the Liz Truss prime ministership, brief though it was. So Sunak took the blame, and he was very gracious, as I said, in that, but it was not entirely his fault. Now, having said that, he was not a good prime minister. Even his closest friends will admit that he did not do well, and that was something that people in Great Britain judged him on.
Now, Professor, just on your point of those predecessors, I mean, the Conservatives, we all know, have had their fair share of challenges in the past couple of years with that slew of prime ministers, as you've just made reference to, in a very short space of time, and all of them leaving under a scandalous cloud, yet they still managed, of course, as the party to cling to power. But what do you think then went wrong this time? Same issues of high cost of living, immigration issues are seemingly global challenges at this point. But interestingly enough, even the right-wing Conservatives saying that their leader actually took their supporters for granted by failing to deliver on their core principles as the Conservatives.
Yes, that's true. Ordinary people in Great Britain were looking for things like an uplift in, for instance, health services. It's very, very clear to almost everyone that the National Health Service has degenerated. But there's no urgency whatsoever on the part of Conservative governments to do something about that, to do anything fundamental about that. So people were worried about the social sectors, social service sectors, such as health. And it seemed also to the public that a very great deal of policy on issues like immigration, for instance, which are very, very live issues here, the government actually didn't have a plan. It just had a knee-jerk reaction. And I think even the most conservative voter would have thought that the plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda was plain stupid. That's not a solution. So it seemed like a government without any kind of constructive imagination, without any commitment to building up key sectors such as health provision. And by and large, with all the power struggles within the Conservative Party, everyone wanting their turn to be prime minister, people were just disillusioned, thinking that this party was not doing anything for them as people, but trying to do everything for themselves as an elite part of Great Britain society.
On that very point, I mean, Professor, even last year in preparation for this year's elections, it was noted that the current geo-economic fragmentation in that region was going to pose a challenge, a significant challenge for the UK. And this has, of course, largely been blamed on the pandemic. But we are years in post-pandemic situation or crisis now. And there still hasn't been much plans on turning around some of those domestic issues. So where do you think they actually failed in terms of implementation there?
They failed differently in different parts of Great Britain. So if you look at the electoral map now, after the recent elections, the Conservative Party has almost no representation left at all in Scotland, in Wales, and in Northern Ireland. It's a much reduced Conservative Party in England. So the further out from London, Westminster you are, even the greater the lack of care of the government for these people. And the great cities of England turned against the Conservatives. I live in a part of London, by Westminster in fact, that has been Conservative for 50 years. And it turned decisively against the Conservatives at these elections. So I think throughout the entire country, but particularly on the non-English part of the country, what you had was a rebellion against this lack of care, this complete distance from a government that didn't seem to care. And Sunak didn't do anything that was tangible to try to turn around this impression. And he basically got what he and the party deserved. But as I say, the rot set in a long time before Sunak became the Prime Minister.
And Prof, in closing, I mean, what are some of your future expectations for the new Prime Minister Starmer? What do you think he brings to the table? And I'm sure that, of course, the Labour Party will be hoping to make a long overdue statement in terms of their leadership as well as policy changes and implementation, especially on issues like foreign policy, when you look at their stance on, of course, the war in Ukraine as well as Israel.
Yes, I think what characterizes the Starmer cabinet, which has just now been appointed, he got to work right away yesterday after making his acceptance speech, appointing his cabinet. Rachel Reeves, whom I've met, I've had dinner with Rachel Reeves. I'm very convinced she'll be a good Chancellor or Minister of Finance, as you would call such a person in South Africa. But I think the standout is going to be the new Foreign Secretary, and that's David Lammy. He's a very idealistic, a very, very ethical person. He'll be a good foreign secretary. He himself is a black man, and he would wish to craft constructive and progressive relationships with Africa, and particularly with South Africa. The idea that you have a leader in human rights, a leader in democracy, that is an important alliance that could be forged. And I must say that President Ramaphosa's extreme graciousness, the speeches he made, in accepting that the ANC had to go into partnership with other parties, that was very, very well noticed here in Great Britain, that here you had a man of genuine democratic caliber. So there will be a great anxiousness on the part of the new British government to work with such a person.
Thank you so much for that input this evening, Professor Stephen Chan there of the London University.